Up until now, the world has shown no concern when African leaders claim that the UN is responsible for terrorist attacks in Africa. The reason for this is that it was difficult to accept that the group that was created to prevent war would commit acts of terrorism. It's possible that the United Nations exploited this mindset to conduct dubious and secret operations in Africa. The United Nations' tens of missions and operations to further Western objectives are best exemplified by Congo. However, there were more unexpected underlying causes for these operations. Yoweri Museveni, a former military officer who is now president of Uganda, and is the person who knows the most about the UN, has revealed this. He recently stated unequivocally that the UN was taking an action in Congo that will take people by surprise. What is it? Let's watch this video to learn about everything. In the West, a former government official is free to express himself, even if he exposes the government. His statements are taken seriously, particularly when he makes sound reasons. But when it comes to Africa, Western politicians don't give a damn about what African leaders have to say. African presidents are ignored even when they express their disapproval and highlight the hypocrisy of Western nations. They will be heard this time, though. Yoweri Museveni, the president of Uganda, recently charged that the UN was supporting terrorism in the Democratic Republic of the Congo and causing havoc in a number of Sahelian nations. Indeed, he employed phrases like conservation of terrorism to describe US peacekeeping efforts, which were ironically meant to combat terrorism in the first place. He claimed that some of the actors in Africa who are trying to play the role of global policemen either instigate or support terrorism. The instability in Libya and other Sahelian nations, such as Burkina Faso, Mali, some of these actors produce problems in Niger, Nigeria, and Chad, among other places. With the help of undemocratic institutions like the Security Council, certain actors have dominated the UN's involvement in the terrorism conservation project in eastern Congo for the past 20 years. He went on to say that it is incredible how the UN can slaughter Congolese civilians, gather, train, steal resources from the country, target Ugandans on occasion, and threaten the Great Lakes people's economic future. Museveni said he would work with the Congolese government to coordinate the power of Uganda's security apparatus. You should be aware that the attack was largely attributed to the Allied Democratic Forces, a Ugandan rebel organization that has been rooted in the turbulent eastern Congo woods for years. Museveni informed UN investigators of his charge, claiming that the UN is to blame for the proliferation of terrorism in the DRC. Who is behind ADF, and how this rebel force survives in the face of international soldiers, including UN troops, are still unknown. At that point, it seems impossible unless the UN forces have been ordered to act as though they are battling these terrorists. In practice, though, they need make sure that they get rid of enough of them so that there are still a significant number of them left so they can proliferate. Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General of the United Nations, said the attack was the worst to hit the organization in recent memory. Although the UN peacekeeping force in Congo is the biggest of its kind in the world, it has had difficulty eliminating different rebel and militia groups in the country's east, which has previously drawn criticism from Museveni. The operation was established in 2010. Uganda launched air and artillery attacks on the ADF's camps a few days after the attack, providing information that points to the rebels' intentions to take aggressive action against Uganda. Having been involved in the chaotic eastern Congo in the past, the East African nation is keen to keep the ADF from returning to Uganda's oil-rich western area, since such instability may put off investors. But Uganda wants to start pumping crude oil in its western area. No one asks the Congolese people about the UN forces, despite the fact that everyone debates their efficacy. No one is prepared to learn what the average Congolese citizen thinks of the UN forces. At a very early age, William Makani, a Congolese activist born in 1999, witnessed the arrival of UN forces in blue helmets and their white tanks in his homeland. Since white is frequently connected to peace, the white tanks make for an ironic image. However, how can tanks promote peace? When UN forces employ violence and carry guns, how can they maintain peace? Mbokani attacks the UN forces, citing his mother's 2019 death at the hands of the Allied Democratic Forces, an Islamist group. His access to his family's land is hampered by the unrest surrounding his community in eastern Beni area. They have been renewing the mandate of a mission that is having difficulty doing its job for almost 25 years, he said. He claimed that rather than becoming better, things get worse. Mbokani is among the hundreds of demonstrators in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo who are opposing the UN mission, also referred to by its French title MONUSCO, which is one of the biggest and most costly peace operations in the world. These demonstrations have descended into violence in recent weeks, with 36 people, including 4 blue helmets, shot dead by peacekeepers. He claimed that it aches and brings tears to his eyes to witness MONUSCO, which has come to defend civilians, shooting at them. A 28-year-old demonstrator and activist from the civil society youth organization, Lucha GNPA Kasarika Megetsi, underlined that the UN should hold peacekeepers accountable for killing civilians and provide compensation to the families of the victims. MONUSCO had scheduled a putout by 2024, subject to DRC security improvements prior to the protests. But the recent uptick in ire has forced the Congolese government to reconsider this strategy. The destructive wars of the 1990s and early 2000s came to a stop with the signing of a power-sharing agreement during MONUSCO's first years in the DRC. But later combat fronts increased, resulting in over 100 armed groups and over 5 million displaced people. According to recent surveys, most people in North Kivu and the nearby province of Ituri want the 12,000 troops in the mission to depart right away. Other foreign military initiatives against armed groups have been approved by the Congolese government, including the potential deployment of a force from the East African Community, a regional organization that the DRC joined in March. Protesters, however, are wary of further outside intervention because they are aware of the damaging effects of colonial authority and continuous regional meddling. They contend that the same national soldier contingents would probably be included in an East African Community army, already playing an important role in MONUSCO. UN peacekeeping efforts in Africa are currently having a difficult time bringing about peace and security, and several African countries are pushing for their withdrawal. In nations including the Democratic Republic of the Congo, DRC, South Sudan, Mali, and the Central African Republic, missions are facing challenges in accomplishing their goals. Under strict instructions, the military are having trouble maintaining general security, controlling tense situations, and successfully defending people. Or maybe missions to eradicate terrorists from the area were never assigned to UN soldiers in the first place. The Jatakai Center for Human Security and Peace Building's executive director, Adib Sani, contends that UN missions frequently fail to confront the ongoing cycle of violence in these nations, departing from their original intent. Mali is one instance where the mission seems powerless in the face of growing violence, and the security situation has not improved. People in Mali have turned against the UN peacekeeping effort, claiming that the troops are making things worse, declaring that MINUSMA's mission is contributing to the issue by escalating tensions between communities. Mali's foreign minister formally urged the UN to remove its troops. The UN mission is rendered ineffective when claims of abuses by UN forces are not looked into, and those responsible are not held accountable. Mohamed Amara of the University of Letters and Human Sciences of Bamako highlighted the mission's vital significance in spite of these difficulties. He voiced worry that more serious problems in the host nations would result from the mission's failure and withdrawal. He emphasized that MINUSMA serves as a barrier between the Malian government and the rest of Mali, and it would be necessary to fill the hole left by its absence. The UN missions are not a total failure, therefore it is true. they have enough justification and performance to demonstrate when asked to leave because they're somewhat effective. Aside from that, their goal is never to eradicate all terrorists from African nations permanently. It's because they wouldn't have any motive to stay if they did. The UN Secretary-General, Antonio Guterres, emphasized that terrorism transcends all boundaries, including those of age, culture, religion, nationality, and geography. He was especially concerned about the state of affairs in Africa, where desperation, poverty, hunger, a lack of essential services, unemployment, and unconstitutional political changes foster an environment that is conducive to the spread of terrorist organizations throughout the continent. The dissemination of violent beliefs around the world is further accelerated by the internet. However, everyone is aware of the issue. The world is counting on the United Nations to provide a solution to this issue. The fact that the UN peacekeeping operations failed, despite deploying troops all over the world, clearly indicates that the organization never intended for them to be successful. Like the United Nations operation in the Congo, which was started in 1960 in response to the Congo crisis, it could control it if it so desired. Add your voice to the total liberation of Africa by leaving a comment in the comments section below. Do not forget to like and subscribe for more informative videos like this one. Let's proceed. You should be aware that Congo descended into anarchy after gaining independence from Belgium, which is why this expedition was dispatched there. Belgium intervened under the guise of re-establishing order and safeguarding Belgian citizens after it caused chaos. On July 14, 1960, the UN Security Council adopted Resolution 143 in response to the Congolese government's request for aid. In addition to authorizing the Secretary-General to offer military support to the Congolese government, this resolution demanded the removal of Belgian forces. The next day, the first United Nations troops, mostly from Asian and African nations, arrived in the Congo. MONUSCO's original mandate grew when circumstances worsened, such as the Katanga insurrection, Prime Minister Patrice Lumumba's termination, the central government's collapse, and the involvement of foreign mercenaries. It grew to assure the evacuation of unapproved foreign armed forces, prevent an imminent civil war, and safeguard the political independence and territorial integrity of the Congo. Nearly 20,000 military men from more than 24 nations made up MONUSCO at its height, with India, Ireland, and Sweden as also. From September 1961 to December 1962, when the fighting intensified, MONUSCO changed its role from peacekeeping to military, fighting and attacking mercenary and separatist forces. The most extensive UN support effort at the time was the gradual phase-out of MONUSCO following Katanga's reintegration in February 1963, which was accompanied by increased civilian aid. The withdrawal of UN personnel was finalized on June 30, 1964. Despite its flaws, this operation demonstrated what the UN could accomplish if its goals were good. However, the current situation is very different. 4 main goals for the mission in the Congo were outlined by the UN. To restore law and order first. Second, to stop other countries from getting involved in the crisis. Third, in order to support the nation's economic growth. Fourth, to bring stability back. But during its engagement in the Congolese issue, the UN faced a number of accusations, particularly for how it handled incidents like Lumumba's murder and Katanga's secession. After Lumumba's passing, criticism grew, with many contending that the Prime Minister should have had stronger protection from the US. During a notable protest in New York, African American protesters disrupted the General Assembly by infiltrating the UN complex. They also targeted the UN office in Belgium. Lumumba's assassination demonstrated that despite its apparent effectiveness, the UN mission was serving to safeguard Western interests. The reason is that when UN forces were in charge of security, how could a prime minister in office be assassinated? It seems impossible that the UN troops were unaware of that before to the assassination. The United States was actively involved in Lumumba's assassination, it has now been revealed. It implies that the UN mission would have unavoidably assisted in the murder. The UN's role was likewise denounced by the USSR in his speech to the UN General Assembly on December 23, 1960. Khrushchev emphasized the politically contentious nature of the operation, charges of being accountable for Lumumba's demise, partiality toward Lumumba's political rivals, and early resistance to confronting the Katanga problem. The United Nations Organization Stabilization Mission visited the Democratic Republic of the Congo later, in 1999. MONUSCO was supported by military forces from Bangladesh, Brazil, China, France, India, and the United States, among other countries. The peacekeeping operations have also featured police officers from Benin, Brazil, France, Jordan, and other nations. The Monarch peacekeeping effort was funded with over US $8.74 billion between 1999 and 2010. However, this operation was also implicated in misconduct. Monarch peacekeepers stationed in Mongwalu were accused by the BBC in a number of news pieces in 2007 and 2008 of engaging in a gold-for-guns trade with nationalist and integrationist front militia leaders. Additionally, as the Secretary-General wrote to the President of the General Assembly on March 24, 2005, the UN itself recognized that there had been several cases of sexual misconduct by UN peacekeeping soldiers in the Congo. The United Nations mission in Congo appears to have failed after more than 24 years there. It has failed to achieve the original goals. Congo requested that MONUSCO depart the nation for this reason. The UN Security Council has now unanimously approved the plan to begin UN forces withdrawal from Congo before the end of the year. The resolution, which was approved by the most powerful body in the UN, calls for the peacekeeping force, MONUSCO, to be withdrawn gradually, responsibly, and sustainably. The Eastern Congo's South Kivu will be the starting point for the withdrawal, and the Congolese government will gradually take over the duties. In a September speech to the UN General Assembly, Congolese President Felix Tshisekedi, who is running for re-election against some 20 other contenders, called for an expedited pullout of the 15,000 peacekeepers. He emphasized the significance of a phased withdrawal that is sustainable and appropriate. Bintou Keita, the top UN official in Congo, and Christophe Lutundula, the country's foreign minister, signed agreements on November 24 to end the UN soldiers' more than 20-year deployment in the Central African country. According to the Security Council's resolution, the withdrawal from South Kivu is expected to be completed by the end of 2024. The Council indicates that it is willing to examine further withdrawals in light of the UN disengagement plan's advancement and the actual circumstances, with a troop ceiling date of 2024 set at 1,300 military soldiers, 660 military observers and staff officers, and 2,001 international police. MONUSCO's mission has been extended until December 20, 2024. This will be lowered to 1,713 international police, 600 military staff officers and observers, and 1,500,000 military troops. The resolution calls for an immediate end to violent and disruptive actions, as well as the illicit exploitation and trafficking of Congo's natural resources. And it harshly condemns all armed organizations operating in the country. It specifically targets conflict minerals that are exploited by armed groups and the criminal networks that support them, including tin, tantalum, tungsten, gold, diamonds, cobalt, and coltan, as well as cocoa, charcoal, timber, and wildlife. The president of Uganda seems to be correct. The UN peacekeeping missions in Africa are purposefully made to be ineffectual in combating terrorism. Western countries benefit from this purposeful inefficiency, which enables them to protect and secure their strategic interests on the African continent. Western influence in African nations increases with the length of time UN forces may remain there. Furthermore, unlike foreign forces, like those from the United States and France, no one questions the UN's neutrality. The necessity of UN peacekeeping soldiers is maintained by permitting terrorism to continue, preserving an ongoing state of conflict for the benefit of Western countries. This goal could be securing access to important resources, preserving regional power, or halting the emergence of political organizations that would be at odds with Western objectives. Therefore, the president of Uganda claims that UN missions may have hidden agendas rather than a sincere desire to promote peace and stability. Will you want the UN to continue conducting covert operations in Africa? African leaders ought to expel UN peacekeeping forces from their nations just like Mali and Congo did. What do you think about the actions of the UN in Africa? Tell us what you think in the comments section below. We explore the rich history, culture, and the ongoing struggle for sovereignty in Africa. Join us in this important conversation by subscribing to our channel. By subscribing, you're not just staying informed, you're becoming part of a movement dedicated to reclaiming Africa's rightful place on the global stage. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. Let's work together to spread knowledge and inspire change. Thanks for watching.